Fighting games, bloody fighting games. We have certainly talked a lot about their history and significance on this channel in the past. There are just so many beautiful games from this genre that all deserve their fair share of attention. But today I'm going to be doing something different. Something I have never done on here before in fact, where I attempt to rank the top 10 most important fighting game franchises of all time. In order to do this, I will factor in games' overall popularity, sales figures, innovations and contributions to the medium overall. But at the end of the day, this is just my list, so feel free to disagree with myself in the comment section down below. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the top 10 most important fighting game franchises of all time. But first, a word from our sponsor. Have you ever dreamed of being a real estate tycoon and managing a wide portfolio of exclusive properties? Then the real world game known as Landlord Go is for you. This is the first in-class business simulator game that uses real life properties from around the globe to give you the feel of real estate management. In Landlord Go you can access the in-game maps based on the real world that reflect your local area, and the game's 3D view and augmented reality features allow gamers a unique perspective, giving us a good way to click around and figure out the best properties to add to our empires. Different kinds of property are colour coded, so if we buy multiple properties that share the same colour icon, we can earn bonus power-ups. One of the coolest features of Landlord Go is certainly the ability to buy shares in famous buildings. For example, if the mood took you, you could purchase Tower Bridge in London. After purchases, you can come back to the game's dashboard and collect rent on your previously bought property, and if you check your portfolio, you will see the game is generating rent every 15 minutes. While most of us are stuck at home in our home countries due to the pandemic, thankfully in Landlord Go we can travel virtually anywhere in the world we like, allowing us to buy property in places of our dreams without even leaving our own front door. As you can see, I am trying my best to make my way up the game's leaderboard, however maybe you can climb above me by becoming the best landlord in your country and eventually the world. All in all, the game takes fun elements of Pokemon Go and the board game Monopoly, combining them into one addictive experience. Click the link below to start the game with 1 million cash and even the option to receive a special influencer pack at an extremely discounted rate. Start your portfolio today. Yeah! Opening today's list, in the 10th spot, I have decided to place the Samurai Showdown series. The franchise, known as Samurai Spirits in Japan, has more than contributed to the genre, and the first game in the series, developed by SNK, was hugely different to anything that came before it. While most fighting games from 1993 were offering experiences that were more in line with Street Fighter II, Samurai Showdown differed from its contemporaries by trading in hand-to-hand combat and replacing it with weapons-based fighting. Pair this with the fact that the gameplay was set in feudal Japan, the combination of unique gameplay and imaginative aesthetics meant that Samurai Showdown brought something completely new to the table. The game, that was designed by Yasushi Adachi, quickly became renowned for its fast-paced action and focus on quick, powerful strikes, whereas other games from the period were more about executing combos. According to Adachi, the big damage players could inflict with single strikes in this game was programmed intentionally to illustrate the terror of fighting weapon to weapon, highlighting the impact of fighting with a sword in the game. A player can lose over half of their life gauge with just one hit. This attention to realism was apparently met with a lot of internal criticism within SNK during the game's development, with some in management rallying for the feature to be removed from the game, but Adachi stood strong, and the destructive force of the sword was ultimately kept in the title. Now, considering that new entries in the Samurai Showdown series are still being produced to this day, the right decision was made with the release of the maiden entry for the franchise. The game would function as a blueprint for weapons-based fighters for years to come. At number 9 on my list we have Soulcalibur, another great weapons-based fighting game franchise, but this series would feature impressive polygonal models from the get-go. While this was definitely not the first ever weapons-based fighter with 3D graphics, it was certainly the first to do it right. The first game in the series, known as Soul Edge in some regions and Soul Blade in others, was developed by Project Soul and published by Namco. Soul Blade has a similar feel to the likes of Namco's Tekken series, but the state-of-the-art at the time graphics and familiar gameplay from said franchise would intuitively be combined with weapons-based fighting. To make Soul Blade more realistic than any fighting games that came before it, the game would mark the first in history to utilise motion capture by using passive optical system markers. Going forward past this point, entries in the series would be marketed as Soulcalibur, and the first Calibur game is widely regarded as one of the greatest Sega Dreamcast games ever made. At the time of release, this was certainly the best looking polygonal fighting game that had ever been seen in our homes. Soulcalibur was also introduced for 8-way run feature. Basically, what this means is that previously, 3D fighters had only limited movement along the third axis, with sidesteps and rolls providing useful but unsustained lateral movement. In Soulcalibur, simply holding down a joystick direction causes the character to move in that direction, giving the player a sense of freedom and deepening the strategy of the game. Like Samurai Showdown, which we also placed on this list, there is a reason as to why Soulcalibur games continue to be produced to this day. At number 8 we have the Marvel vs Capcom series. The first game from the franchise, simply titled X-Men vs Street Fighter, featured a dream combination of fighters no one would have ever felt would be possible. Seeing a cast of both X-Men and Street Fighter in the same game as a child blew my tiny little mind. But when it comes to this game and all of the many Marvel vs Capcom follow-ups, there is so much more substance to this than just an extremely cool crossover. The game borrows the modern fighting game blueprint established by Street Fighter 2 and mixes it with a number of other awesome features, including the possibility of aerial combat, a Capcom feature that first appeared in X-Men Children of the Atom. The huge moves and aerial combat are paired with amazing tag team mechanics, allowing players to switch between 2 to 3 different fighters at will. All in all, offering stupendous chaotic action and an experience that is not quite like any other. While these crossover games would dip in quality over the years, the fun would peak with Marvel vs Capcom 2, a game with a ridiculously huge roster of fighters with some of the most appealing sprite work you will ever see in a fighting game. There is just something so special about the 3-on-3 action that this game contains, and for this reason Marvel vs Capcom will forever remain an all-time favourite series for many gamers around the world. Number 7 is a franchise that played a huge part in my own childhood, as I'm sure it did for many others as well. Killer Instinct, developed by Rare and published by Midway and Nintendo, wowed gamers at the time of release by combining fast-paced fighting game mechanics with a graphical style of the likes of Donkey Kong Country. A strong case could be made that back in 1994, Killer Instinct featured the most detailed graphics and most diverse range of characters that had ever been witnessed within a fighting game. While it may have borrowed the attack set of Street Fighter 2 and its finishing move style mechanic from Mortal Kombat, the game stood on its own 2 feet as something completely new due to the game's insane combo system, allowing players to perform long automatic combos, ultra combos that could sometimes reach upwards of 80 hits, and even the highly memorable Combo Breaker, where the player could break an onslaught of moves they were facing. Arcade cabinets were loud, proud and unmissable, meaning that it was hard to not feel compelled to play this game when out and about in the wild, and in the homes Killer Instinct would go on to be one of the best-selling Super Nintendo games of all time. From the graphics to the music and sound effects, everything about Killer Instinct screams memorable. Moving down to number 6 on the list, I felt it was time to give SNK some more love by including the King of Fighters franchise. Back in 1994, while SNK themselves had built up a reputation for producing great fighting games, their most well-known fighting series of all would be birthed with the King of Fighters. The King of Fighters marks a number of firsts in the world of gaming, probably the most notable of all being that this was the first mass crossover experience ever produced within fighting gaming. Sure, the water had been tested by including an Art of Fighting character in Fatal Fury Special, but the King of Fighters was the first to mass mix franchises together into one. The first King of Fighters would include characters from Fatal Fury, Art of Fighting, Ikari Warriors and Psycho Soldier, and mix them with a number of characters produced specifically for the game. The King of Fighters was also the first fighting game to have a team-based battle system, offering a format consisting of 3-on-3 team-based matches from the get-go. While here in the Anglosphere we do not hear quite as much about King of Fighters games as perhaps we should, it is worth noting that in South Asia and Central and Southern America that the King of Fighters is as well known and beloved as that of Street Fighter games. So the franchise's impact, innovation and success more than warrants its place in this top 10 list. At number 5, I'm going to be placing the Virtua Fighter series of games, one of the most influential fighting game franchises ever made, that gets nowhere near the amount of credit that these games perhaps deserve. Virtua Fighter, created by Sega AM2 and designed by Yu Suzuki and Seiichi Ishii, holds the accolade of being the first fighting game in all of history that included polygonal characters. Insanely produced as early as 1993, it makes it the oldest game on this list so far. This arcade game would blow players' minds with its fast-paced floaty action that even featured a camera that moved along different axes depending on the fighter's location, which would even showcase multiple viewpoints of instant replays. All this happened 3 years before Nintendo released Mario 64, and paired with the fact that Virtua Fighter featured high quality gameplay, smoothness and realism for its day, players could not be unimpressed. Obviously today, the original Virtua Fighter looks somewhat dated, and the franchise never reached the same level of popularity elsewhere that it received in Japan, which I would partially put down to the fact that the Sega Saturn sold better there than elsewhere. Despite this, there has still been the odd Virtua Fighter game over the years, even if the franchise never innovated to the same level ever again. Virtua Fighter is still the granddaddy of polygonal fighting games. Moving down to number 4, we have Tekken, a franchise that achieved what Virtua Fighter could not, managing to become hugely popular the world over. What many may not know though is that Tekken and Virtua Fighter have even more in common than just the way the two franchises looked. Just 1 year after co-developing Virtua Fighter at Sega, Seiichi Ishii would depart to go work at Namco, where he would work on and give the world Tekken. Away from the arcades, Tekken games would also appear on Sony PlayStation consoles, becoming some of the most popular games on some of the most popular consoles ever made, with Tekken Tag Tournament functioning as the primary launch title that helped promote the PlayStation 2, the greatest selling game console in all of history. So Tekken's influence in the world of gaming is absolutely insane. Overall though, Tekken games on the PlayStation were just so palatable. They featured a graphical style that was adored at the time and a simple gameplay system that was intuitive enough that Tekken games could practically be enjoyed by just about anyone. The outrageous amount of unlockable fighters and different full motion video endings would just keep players coming back for more and more with these games. Tekken offered everything that the core demographic of gamers could have possibly wanted during the mid to late 90s, and to this day Tekken continues to adapt and remain popular despite the franchise being over a quarter of a century old at this point. Tekken will always hold an important place in fighting game history, and the game's colourful cast of fighters are certainly not going to be forgotten about by anyone anytime soon. Moving down to number 3, I give you the Super Smash Bros. Games. Nintendo's epic crossover franchise that has become one of Nintendo's biggest brands, despite the first entry in the series on the Nintendo 64 originally being somewhat of a budget experimental title by Nintendo standards. Masahiro Sakurai's hard work and genius is impossible to deny when you look at this franchise's humble roots. When it comes to the world of fighting games, Smash Bros. Has always been a controversial topic, as the game does not include many of the key elements that make up your average fighting game. As mentioned on this channel many times before, most fighting games were inspired by Street Fighter 2, but Smash Bros. Took a different path, leading to many people classifying it as just a multiplayer party game, rather than a true competitive fighter. Analysing this further, while it is clear that these games are not traditional versus fighters in any shape or form, I think we can easily place this title in the arena fighting genre, a subgenre within the fighting game sphere where we can also place the likes of Airgites and Power Stone, other fun games we can have a laugh with at a party. Taking into account that many fighting game aficionados scoff at the thought of Smash Bros. Being considered a true fighting game, this often leads to all sorts of insecurities within the Smash Bros. Competitive community. Absolutely no one can deny though the extreme level of popularity that this arena party game actually has. What started out as no more than light whimsical fun on the Nintendo 64 has morphed over the years, resulting in every entry in the series having more depth and content than the next. The amount of work that has gone into improving these games over the years has led to Super Smash Bros. Technically becoming the best-selling fighting game franchise of all time, even if the games are just of the arena or party variety. I guess building a brand around the likes of Mario, Pikachu and The Legend of Zelda is of course going to go a long way. At number 2, we have a game franchise which was at one point in time the most controversial on the entirety of planet Earth, which in turn would even lead to laws being changed across the world with regards to how games would be certificated. This series was just that frickin' influential. Of course, I am talking about Mortal Kombat, Midway's fighting games created by Ed Boon and John Tobias. This versus fighting franchise would quickly make headlines around the time of its launch, due to its reputation for high levels of graphic violence being performed by digitised sprites, thus meaning that within this 1992 fighting game, characters played by real humans were performing controversial fatalities on each other. The first instalment in this all-American developed series was released in a time frame when there were no video game rating systems in the US as of yet, therefore giving Midway the opportunity to be able to market the game to anyone they wanted, even children, resulting in children up and down the country quickly falling in love with this game. The major controversy would result in several court cases relating to the so-called extremely violent content, which would culminate in the introduction of the Entertainment Software Rating Board. This fiasco, though, just helped Mortal Kombat grow and grow, resulting in countless games, even multiple movies, with a new Mortal Kombat film even set to see release this very year. Mortal Kombat, like Street Fighter 2 before it, was so popular that it would spawn countless copycats, with an endless amount of gory fighting games featuring fatality systems seeing release shortly after the first game. Mortal Kombat is one of those rare examples of a brand that transcends just gaming and becomes part of mainstream culture itself. I think we're at a stage now where most people's grandparents could probably tell you what Mortal Kombat is, which of course cannot be said for Super Smash Bros, no matter how many copies Nintendo managed to shift. By this point I'm going to imagine that 99% of you know which fighting game franchise I'm going to give the number 1 spot to today. Number 1 is of course Street Bloody Fighter, the franchise that would influence the entire genre more than any other. While the franchise itself dates back to 1987, the game would change the world for good in 1991, with the release of Street Fighter II The World Warrior. The game that offered a large selectable roster of fighters, bold sprites with diverse movesets, combos and groundbreaking player versus player action, Street Fighter II can be credited for rejuvenating the arcade industry, the Super Nintendo becoming popular in Europe, and as stated many times on here before, forming the very blueprint in which 99% of fighting games going forward would be based around. Street Fighter II is just that frickin' important. Street Fighter though would also impact the world in massive ways in years to come. While it sold poorly, an argument could be made for Street Fighter III being one of the most stunning sprite-based games ever made, and during the early days of Xbox Live, the online service got gamers playing Street Fighter II again, resulting in not only a resurgence in an interest for Street Fighter games, but fighting games in general. This has led to Capcom later releasing Street Fighter IV, then past that 5. And both of these games have been very popular, and continue to shape the future of the genre in their own ways. Street Fighter really is the most important series of fighting games the world has ever seen. So ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed my opinions on what I think the 10 most important fighting game franchises are, and why. Let me know in the comment section if you think I had any hot takes, and more importantly, what you would consider to be the top 10 most important fighting franchises that have been created. I would love to read your own lists, especially if you can justify your choices too. This could be some fun reading for us all. I have produced many standalone videos on loads of the games that we have talked about today, so why not look them up in my fighting game playlist and check them out, especially if you are a newer subscriber here. I would also like to take a minute to plug my live streams over on Twitch, where we can all talk about fighting games and other things on a regular basis. On top of this, I would like to mention my new wrestling history channel, Top Hat Wrestling Man, where we now have a selection of 5 different videos for you to enjoy covering wrestling history. Finally, I would like to give a shout out to today's sponsor, Landlord Go, and a massive thank you to those who back my channel over on Patreon, helping to secure the future of the content I make. I love you all very much. So shout outs go out to Sebastian Velez, A Murder of Crows, Carl Johnson, Heyo Paulo Lopez, Ben Harradine, Corey Imarsh Sr., Capcom vs SNK, BXL Gotham, Ryan Dinched, Evan Border, Philip Namph, Azra Rakai, Keith Ferguson, Dropkin Varela, Michael Cullix, Ago, Jordan Durant, Angel Light 85, Ian Boyle, Nick Daniels, Princess Zana, Daniel Daly, Computer Man, House of a Ted, ECU Professor, Kid Anime, Justin Wang, Hermes Gonzalez, Instant Gratification Monkey, Man Shovel, James Bishop, JB, Michael Hall, Wesley Sanghi, Wayne Kerr, Langston Miller, Noob, Brian Barry, Sarah Powell, Flaming Renee, Marvin Araliga, Chris Cool, TOG Driver, Adrian Hannington, Bernard NG, Richard Stu Stewart, Dan Van Dammit, Lewis Viant, John Bates, David Bowell, Chris Fisk, Mike Bruno, Rick67, Antonio Rodriguez, Craig Jenkins, Retroverse.com, Casey Wright, Synth Spaces, Zai, Andrew Bazansky, Gunther Hendricks, and everybody else who backs my channel. Thank you all so much. Yeah, cheerio.